Drop your questions in the chat and we'll begin a conversation. I'll start us off with a question that's really two questions, very non-fiction-y, because like both these essay collections, like they both of you draw inspiration from primarily when you're thinking about nonfiction. And then the other question that's related to that is like range of things that's like covered in both your collections. What's kind of the art that ordering your essays?
Maybe I'll start, Jennifer, if that's okay. It's a kind of a tricky question. I did mention that one of the essays in the book was written 20 years ago, but hadn't found a home in a book. So I maybe opened myself up to this. When I've created essay collections, I've very much intended them to be miscellaneous. And this comes partly from maybe my inability to remain focused or create a narrative arc that goes across a long-term experience. And also it comes from a deep admiration of essay collections in the past. So centuries ago, it seems to me, from my reading, that the essays that were collected into books were largely unified by the voice of the writer, much more so than any topic or like any subject matter. But I do think that those type of essay collections are fine, but they also feel like a kind of talk about what you want to, have an elevator pitch. What's this book about? And it usually wants to be something subject matter wise. So again, because of my inability and my admiration for these essay collections of the past, I've tried to make miscellaneous. That said, I've tried to unify them by some abstract concept. So the first book I put out was called Quotidiana, which is a coinage meaning everyday things. And I was pointing to the way that essays, not just mine, but essays generally, can often tackle something you would think is mundane, unimportant, even boring. And then they create some connection to the world of ideas and therefore become interesting. One of the best examples I can think of is Virginia Woolf's The Death of the Moth. During what happens is a moth dies. That's the whole narrative arc of the piece. I just given away, spoiler alert, the moth dies. But that's in the title, right? And so effectively, almost nothing happens. But what really happens is that she applies energy from that. So that's what I was trying for. The second book I called Sublime Physic, and that I discovered as I was researching Avogadro, the Italian chemist for whom we've named Avogadro's number, which states a volume of gas, no matter the gas, no matter the content of the gas, will contain an equal number of particles. And that helped determine atomic weights for a lot of elements that we hadn't yet figured out. So Avogadro was the chair of Fisica Sublime at the University of Turin. So Fisica Sublime, these seem to be ideas in direct opposition, the physical and the sublime. And maybe it would be equivalent to our modern day theoretical physics. That makes a lot of sense. And I love the phrase. It seemed like, that's what essays are too, right? They take your things that you can touch, they derive from them something that is at least thoughtful, abstracted, but sometimes also spiritual, like the sublime, the feeling of awe we can experience when confronted with our own limits, mortality, smallness in the face of the universe. And then this latest book, I kind of explained already the idea of disparates. It was a reaction somewhat against my previous books. I was trying to write shorter essays. The book includes 3 types of essays and then a 4th little asterisk on it. There are aborted essays that I intentionally cut before they sprawl too big. There are lyric essays, and lyric essay quite properly could describe the type of writing Jennifer does, where the language is very poetic and evocative. I was goofing on that and writing essays about song lyrics, or at least somehow intersecting song lyrics. So that Against the Wind would be an example of that. And the third type of essay I wrote were essays in borrowed forms. Writers sometimes call these hermit crab essays, because as a hermit crab borrows a shell from another animal, these essays borrow a shape or form from another type. So there's an essay that's an eBay auction, an essay that's a word search puzzle, one that looks like The Elements of Style by Strunk and White, and several other different borrowed forms. And then the asterisk was that I asked a lot of friends to contribute. A guest musician will show up to sing the bridge of a song or something like that. So there's not a thematic, even like there's a thematic, but not a subject connection between the pieces. There's only an abstract concept about the way the essay works that unifies them. That's a long enough answer, so I'm going to ignore Willy's second question and just hear from Jennifer.
No, I'll work with Willy's second question, which is, I think, a question about inspiration. I love that question. I think it's a great one to think about. And I always say to my students that there are essays, right? They're all around us. They're just waiting to be written. The trick is we just have to have our eyes open. And I find for myself as a writer that my eyes are the most open when I'm actively writing. So if I am journaling, or if I have these things that are simmering in my head, and so then when I'm out, say, running in the morning, or I'm at the grocery store, I see the world in terms of its like essaic possibility, which there's a downside to that as well, because there are these moments where I think something's happened in my life and I'll be like, hey, that's an essay. I could do something with that. And I think, you know, you don't want to rob your art, but in general, I think it's pretty miraculous. I think most artists would say the same thing, that when they're practicing their art, they see the world that way. So if they're a visual artist or a ceramicist, that's how they then meet their world. And for me, a lot of it is about what are the things that are intersecting in my life at a particular moment. And then I just trust that because they're intersecting in my body, they're going to intersect in a fruitful and interesting way on the page. And I just bring them together and then just see what happens. But it's, you know, it's a wonderful way to meet the world, seeing how it might become language.
Thank you both for your wonderful answers. We got a question from an audience member, and they're curious about how many times editing process, what it's like for both of you.
I'll pick up first. I was writing down what you just said, Jennifer. It's a wonderful way to meet the world, seeing how it might become language. I love that phrase. It really confirms what I feel. So thanks for putting into those words. About the revision process, it varies wildly for me. I mentioned that I wrote an eBay auction essay. To explain that, I sold on eBay the water left over by a writer named Michael Martone. I did this because he had written about his habit of just drinking the leftover water when he hosted readings. So he had ingested the leftover water of a lot of famous writers. And I suppose that his leftover water would then contain all of their greatness combined. I wrote it by asking friends. I told friends about the auction, had them write in questions, because on eBay you can ask the seller a question. These were, you know, pretty silly questions, philosophical questions, and I answered them in that week. And I almost didn't end it on Friday. I sold a poster left over from a reading I was supposed to do on March 13th, Friday the 13th, which was less than 24 hours after BYU and a lot of the rest of the world shut down completely for the pandemic. So there, over the course of a week, I was answering questions, and I had to be somewhat meticulous in my first drafts because they were pushed to eBay and then they're done. I discovered one major mistake I'll have to edit out, but otherwise that was like pressure filled in a way. Nobody really cares, but a few, you know, close friends somewhat care. And I had to write these brief, weird passages with almost no revision. That said, I've also had essays that took me at least up to 7 years. And not that I was working on them every day, but it took so long to figure out where they were going, what they were doing. And with one that I'm thinking of in particular, it began one day I was putting my daughters to bed, and one was showing me how she was learning how to whistle, and another was learning how to snap her fingers, and another time was learning to ride a bike, not at that exact moment, but generally. And it popped into my mind that I remembered learning how to spit. This is very curious. I want to write about learning how to spit. And I wrote the event, I wrote some connected ideas, but it was a pretty thin essay for a long time, because it was just like, hey, weird, spitting. It wasn't doing anything. And I connected the two much more significant spit-related ideas years later. And those rounded out the essay. And it was really happenstance that allowed me to come to what I felt was a much more important essay. And Jennifer just talked about kind of the attentiveness that writing enables. And I think, you know, I would fluctuate in and out of attentiveness to that essay, but it was the fact of being attentive to that essay that allowed me to recognize the punch that came later on and allowed me to round out the essay. It ended up, I think, being an essay about repentance or about forgiveness, which is way cooler and more important and deeper than I remember how to speak. Isn't that cool? You know, so it varies a lot. I am at the stage where at least I can get the grammar right, so that helps in terms of keeping things moving along.
Thanks, Pat. I would just add that I think, you know, revision is, for me, it's emotional. You have to be willing to let go. You have to be willing to reconceive. And it takes me a little while to get there, because you make something that you know, you're pretty attached to. You've been sitting with it. And then you give it to other people and they say, no, not quite. And so then there's the moment where you get to crumple on the ground and you can wail, you can cry, you can berate these readers, you can do all of those things. And you have to get to that moment. I mean, I tell my students all the time that what separates the writers who make it, whatever that means, and the writers who decide they're not going to keep writing is the writers who make it are the ones that are willing to revise, and to revise hard, to gut the piece, to be willing to take whole things out because it's not working, and to try and see the piece anew. And friend Rana, who is here, would tell me that she thinks I'm a really good reviser. And I always take that as a compliment. Like, I just think that's a compliment to feel that you are willing to do the hard work necessary. And really that's, that's the way we live our life every day, right? We revise every day. We get the chance to do it again. And so we should do so with our writing.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you so much, Pat. We just got this really good question that came in, so I'm just going to read it kind of verbatim. 3 pieces that hinged on epiphany. Sometimes a comic one, sometimes a profound one. What's the role of epiphany / revelation? Lack of knowledge. Do you ever write essays that do not include epiphanies?
Well, I'm thinking, Jennifer, could you take that one first?
Oh, sure. Give me the really hard one. Okay, so, sometimes epiphany happens in your life. Like, that's what happens. All of a sudden, there's this moment of clarity. I would say for me as a writer, epiphany happens more often in revision, not actually in my life. So if I'm going to write about something, understanding, not epiphany, because epiphany carries the feeling that like something divine comes down literally and solves everything. And I'm going to say that I'm writing toward understanding. And so through revision, getting closer and closer to figuring out what it is that you are is that epiphanic? I would say no, because it's more work than that. It's like labor. You have to work hard to get there. Now, the second part of that question is really interesting, which is, can you write without epiphany? And I would say, I for sure think that essays exist without understanding. Like, I think your voice as a writer is based largely on the fact that you deeply understand what it is you're trying to convey. And that's what gives your writing a sense of voice and authority. And you have to know what that is. And a reader can tell immediately if you're trying to fake it, or if you're trying to like just present a problem and just let the reader try and figure it out. Like, you have to do that work. Even in a lyric piece that's got a lot of empty, not have an epiphany. I don't think a piece cannot have understanding on the writer's part. They have to know what they're trying to do. Even if they don't quite pull it off, they have to know.
I really like that. That's super smart way of thinking of it. Oh, the dog is awake now. When I heard the question, I was trying to like cast about in my mind and wonder if what my of this. So it's hard for me to like plug into that paradigm a little bit, largely because of the reasons Jennifer was pointing to, that the epiphany feels like the eureka aha moment, and that rarely happens in the living. But I want to remind myself that what I'm writing is not the thing I'm writing about, that the thing I experienced is quite different from the thing a reader will experience once I've written from that thing into language, and then they've read the language and applied to it their own understandings and their preconceptions and so forth. So I do love the idea of understanding as something to search for, but also I want to recognize that understanding usually for me doesn't resolve into a kind of concretion or it's off on kind of way. It's not that now I've got the facts, the answer, I get it all. It always remains with a vastness of things that are still complex, mysterious, and probably is more in the striving and less in the arriving. So that's important to me to distinguish.
Thank you so much, Pat and Jen. Those were like really deep answers to like a really like difficult question. So I deeply audience member. Beautiful reading! ! Jennifer, because her essayists work out what to include in the reflective moments of an essay. Their partner commented that she often gets.
Well, thank you to whoever sent that comment in. That is a deep bow to you of gratitude. I think the reflective voice, especially in memoir, is really difficult. So if you think a lot of narrative nonfiction and a lot of fiction work largely by scene and summary, and those are the two tools that the writer has at their disposal. But memoir has this kind of, and personal essay has this kind of musing element to it, this reflective voice. And I think it's really hard to handle because it can become a didactic and it can take charge of the essay. And the writer doesn't trust that they've done the work on the page, so then they tell the reader what they're supposed to think or come away with. So for me, the way I sort of keep my reflection is I try and let the scenic detail do the work of the reflection. So in a scene, pointing to different elements of the scene that set the tone or the mood or help the reader understand how to feel about what's going on. That is I now stepping in and doing the reflective work without doing active reflection on the page. I still, I think there are moments when you should step forward and reflect, but I try and keep those to a minimum, I guess, because I've just seen when I see other writers who don't like it as a reader, it pushes me out of the work. And so I'm just really careful and try and let the scene do the work. if your scene's doing the work, there's not much else you have to do because you have grounded your reader and you're pointing right there to what it is that's important and to hold on to, the metaphors that are rising out of your life.
Thank you for that response, Jennifer. That was great. I have one more question for Patrick, and we're ask. Please drop it in the comments right now. Be brave, and if you're extra brave, you can turn on your camera and ask. Mentioned with the style of like essays and the tradition you're building from, a lot of the essays are kind of more than like the theme that they're tackling. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to mention just because your voice of wondering is how did you arrive at that style? Like when did you decide to choose like, you know, the kind of like playing around that you do? What kind of drew you to that and what drew you to?
That's a good question. We have the, my daughter's boyfriend just arrived, so the dogs are excited. I'll hope they'll keep quiet. This is a fun part of the Zoom reading, right? You don't get this if you're all in an auditorium. I appreciate you saying that, Willy. So I absolutely agree with what Jennifer said about the way a scene can work and can transmit to a reader idea, emotion, taken with essays from the distant past. So I mentioned Montaigne in my reading, and he's not much of a narrative writer. In fact, he says, there's nothing so contrary to my style as an extended narration. It does say extended, there's an adjective on there, and that's key. There are times when he writes about events from his life. He also talks about people who encouraged him to write things that had happened to him, but he says, that's not really my thing. I'm more interested in exploring via kind of research and the philosophizing. Now that wasn't always appealing to me. When I first started reading, I was really into the drama that a narrative can create. And I recall, in fact, in an early workshop, when I started the PhD program at Ohio University, one of my classmates, who's become a great friend, was constantly interrupting the narrative flow. And I noted that as something just like jarring to me. I later came to see essay as a kind of like a different mode with different purposes and goals. I don't mean this as universal or anything like that, but there's a long and proud tradition of the interruptive. So when I read, say, a novel, I'm often interested in forgetting that I'm reading and entering into a world, a place other than my own that I can inhabit and be surprised by at every turn. But when I read an essay, I kind of want to be reminded that I'm reading at every turn. I really love the movement where, you know, the essayist pulls back from some metaphor and says, now where was I? And goes, or like George Orwell begins his essay, England, Your England, with the phrase, as I write, highly civilized human beings are flying overhead trying to kill me. That's a dramatic moment, of course, but the as I write is what I'm pointing to. So I want to see the outer frame. I want to inhabit the space of the author sitting in the chair writing and their mind processing. It could be a distant event from their childhood, or it could be something more recent. I want to revisit that place with them, but I want to always be primarily in the thinking mind, engaged with the past and making meaning of it. To me, really delicious, really exciting. And it's a different kind of exciting from what I might expect if I'm reading a novel or other kinds of nonfiction, in fact, too. And I don't disparage those at all. But that, I think, has led to the development of any kind of voice that I can lay claim to, is that realization 2 decades ago, that that's what essays do and I like it. And me trying to also invite a reader, like William Hazlitt says of Montaigne, that he was the first writer to invite you behind the curtain to sit down in gown and slippers beside the fire. Right? It's a really pleasing image to me. There's nothing really happening in that, but you're conversing with another mind, and sometimes at great distance or at a long time ago. So I'm trying to translate my thinking into the voice that I write from and with. And sometimes it's humorous, sometimes it's insightful, sometimes it may be just ludicrous or something. But I want to create that space for the reader that I like to inhabit when I read other writers too.